Welcome back to another episode of Hungry for the Word podcast. As always, I'm your host, Tommy Vento, with my lovely co-host, Julie Vento, and we do our best to talk to you about what it means to be a mature son of God on the earth. So thanks for tuning in. On this episode today, episode 37, we're going to be talking a little bit about mastery. I think there is a bit of a misconception, perhaps, at least in myself. I guess I shouldn't say that it's a universal one or just strictly in the West, but uh, the misconception that mastery of anything is a destination, it's an arrival point, as opposed to a mindset and a lifestyle. I think that there is kind of a wonderful hypertension as we walk with the Lord of mastery does look like becoming an expert. It does look like things looking more effortless. It does look like you being able to juggle more balls. It looks like being able to handle even more of what life throws at you, more responsibilities and things of that nature, while at the same time, the closer you get to mastery, oftentimes the more novice the approach is. And what I mean by that is the one who is the complete master still approaches life every day as a student. And so just talking a little bit about that today and some scripture that sort of supports that, as well as how we can apply it to our own lives and our own mindset, so that uh, we don't fall into the same trap that I know I've fallen into countless times, and perhaps will still again in the future, of thinking, gosh, I made it all the way here and I'm still having this problem, or I'm still
Yeah.
seeing this thing, or whatever it is. And we've said it before, and I'm hesitant to say it as to not sound as though it's doctrine, because I don't mean to speak this over anyone's life, but typically speaking, the saying new level, new devil doesn't, again, it doesn't apply to me, at least, new attack, as it were. Like, you don't reach deeper states of connection with the Father, and because you're in that place under his wing, experience deeper attack from the enemy. But the inverse of that the deeper you get with the Father, the more he wants you to be complete and well-rounded. And so you will face newer, deeper, new levels of challenges than you have in the past as you were building unto mastery, because the master is able to handle the harder problems as well as the easier ones, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
as we kind of dive in a little bit, when we talk about mastery, what do you think of? What comes to mind for you?
Well, first, just a comment on what you were saying. One of the things that stuck out to me was effortless.
Hmm.
Um, it doesn't mean that we don't face some of the same challenges, but there is kind of a new way we approach things. So
Right.
we do get the same challenges and get to see our success and
Hmm.
of what we've previously been challenged with, but faced with other things. But we've built this confidence over time about how to
Hmm.
walk through this. So it does become a little bit more effortless. We kind of know the rhythm of
Hmm.
the grace that is available in this walk. So
Hmm.
uh, I think, and I'm also reminded, you and I've talked a couple times about new level, new devil again.
Hmm.
Uh, but we often think of it as climbing a mountain. But you
Ah,
had that great visual of the mountain actually coming up. We're standing at the top of the mountain and the
yes.
mountain's being raised as we're being
Yes.
raised. And so I kind of think of that as, um,
Yeah. Same. Well, and it's funny because the first verse that I want to read, that uh it is the verse where the Lord kind of first helped me see that visual.
Mhm.
Um, because again, I think so much of my approach in the past has been I want to arrive. We especially here in the West,
Linear.
we yes, linear. We want mastery because we think that when we get to that place, we will have something, be something, do something, have the recognition, have the money and the value around it, have society validate you, all these different things that come with it. And really the I think the humility of the journey with the Lord is that you're always at the peak of the mountain because you're always as close to him as you can be in that moment. You never
Mhm.
go tumbling back down the mountain, as it were, even though it might feel like that at times. The analogy kind of falls short because there is constantly moving to new heights. But I'll read the verse and then sort of dive
Yeah,
into
good.
the way that it works. So this is from Isaiah chapter 28, verse 10, and then again in verse 13. Again, so important that this is the way he works that he mentions it twice within just a few stanzas. And so he says, um, "For it is precept upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line, here a little, there a little." And then he says again in 13, "Therefore the word of the Lord will be to them precept upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, here a little, there a little." And I
Mhm.
think that, especially for my generation, but humans, we are, we're really impatient. We want it now. There's a handful of opportunities I can think of. Like we have a Traeger grill, so it's a smoker grill, and oftentimes when you smoke things, you go low and slow. You cook it for a lot longer of a period at a lower temperature, and the result is much juicier meat, much softer meat. You pull it apart, you get kind of the burnt smoke ring on the outside. There's all these different perks, but ultimately it takes more planning and preparation. It takes a longer time in the grill and you manning that. And I think of how in a lot of ways, oftentimes we would rather have the 60-second Uncle Ben's rice, you
Yeah.
know, like it's a
The
lot
microwave.
easier.
Yeah.
Yeah, the microwave when you're hungry and you finally realize that you're hungry, you want to eat right then. You don't want to have a long period of the process of getting the food ready when you're already hungry. And so I think in the same way, the Lord, we're already hungry now for his word, whether or not we recognize it. And his word is so much more satisfying. And again, I'm not knocking Uncle Ben's like as a
Oh
brand.
yeah.
I'm not saying that. It's the analogy, but the much slower burn of learning with him, walking with him, the root not fruit approach of character development rather than specific outcomes right away. There is a learning curve because we would prefer to have it sooner. We would prefer if we didn't have to persuade our hearts and go through a few weeks of experiencing sadness and seeing our heart faced with some of the beliefs that we have. We would prefer to just snap our fingers and get it, trust the
Mhm.
Lord, have the thing in our life, manifest this, stand in the life we want. And yet the it's so important that he repeats every phrase twice, precept upon precept twice, line upon line twice, here a little, there a little, that it's not about portion control, so to speak, as much as, oh, he's holding back from you so you don't eat more than your fill at one time. It is the word of the Lord, the logos, the law of the Lord is so perfect and righteous and so multidimensional and so true across all circumstances that it's, as we've mentioned before, the eternal Tao that can be communicated isn't the eternal Tao. And so it inevitably requires precept upon precept, line upon line, here a little, there a little, over the course of 5 years, 10 years, 50 years of walking with him. And it's not because he's holding it back from you. It's actually because it's so dense of subject matter and it's so in depth of material that it has to be learned slowly. Otherwise, you just simply couldn't retain it and live within it all, you know?
Yeah, I think there's another reason too, when in the in the word when he instructs the Israelites to go into the promised land, um, he also says, we're going to just take these giants and
Yes.
take this land little by little. Otherwise, it would overwhelm you.
100%.
So, so yes, it's very dense, and we will spend our life here, you know, getting we
Delightfully.
can't know we can't know it all,
Yeah.
but also that precept upon precept is for our benefit too. So
Yes.
you mentioned it in passing quickly, but if we get a new piece of information and we have faith around it and it works in our life, say for instance, um, there's fruit, great,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but there might not be a root associated with it. So the
Totally.
next time it happens, you know, there was a little nuance that we were taught, and so that those the word being rooted in us is kind of what you're talking about. And again,
Totally.
just a reminder, it's not a destination, it is a lifestyle.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, again, as you were saying that, I'm reminded yet again, gosh, this is episode 37. I'd be willing to bet that 25 of our 30 plus episodes, we mentioned the parable in Mark 4. But there's a reason
Mm,
Jesus said this is the most important parable.
you
And
got to get
it's
this.
what you're talking about. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's without depth of root. That's the second person that he talks to. Immediately upon hearing the word, you spring up from this rocky soil and you have delight and you love this thing. But as soon as trials come, as soon as the scorching heat bears down on that weed, it doesn't have the root system. It doesn't have the structure to be able to withstand that tougher period. And I know that I've felt convicted before a handful of times in my journey. He's pointed out to me that I have received a new word from him with outrageous joy. And I hear it and I'm excited and I love it and I live in it in that moment. And then 3 days later, a week later, I come under trial because again, that's part of the point at the outset of Mark. We've covered this in an episode before. The process that Jesus goes through is the process that we all go through. You hear a word, God says to him, "This is my beloved son in whom I'm well pleased." And immediately upon hearing that, Spirit takes him into the wilderness, and the enemy tempts him and says, "Well, if you are the son," already drops the word beloved. And it's this point of he gives you a word in preparation for the trial you're about to face. And you and I failed to recognize that pattern for a long portion of my journey at the beginning. And you would have to remind me, well, what did he say to you 3 days ago? Go look back at your notes at what he just told you. And so now you're feeling this pain, you're feeling this doubt, you're feeling belief in the opposite direction. And instead of reverting back to the word he had given me, I reverted back to my old heart beliefs of he's not helping me. I have to do this myself, whatever the belief was in that moment. And so
Mhm.
the recognition that he doesn't want to tell you something just so it's like a topical skin map, helpful. It's several layers deep, all the way to the root. He is deepening you and strengthening you. Um, and you had mentioned something else about this deepening of the word that he wants to give you and how David often in the Psalms or in his own letters and words says something to the effect of, I will meditate on your word day and night. And it's this recognition again, we kind of lost on us because we've only ever lived in a world where Holy Spirit is dwelling within us, where
Hmm.
the Lord is here. He's in the city now. And imagine living back at a time where the Lord didn't make himself that known to humanity. And so you would get a word from the Lord. And I picture Mother Mary, that word from the Lord, when that one angel showed up, was enough to take her through a year of trial and tribulation and struggle and shame and doubt and fear and all these things that she went through, because she was able to hold so firmly to that word in her heart. And I think in the same way, that's what he's building us into. And so when we talk about mastery, I think I might have mentioned this quote as well. Bruce Lee says, I don't fear the man who's practiced 10,000 kicks one time. I think in my mind, oh, 10,000 kicks, he's got to be a master. He knows all 10,000 kicks. When the real definition of mastery is, I fear the man who's practiced one kick 10,000 times,
Mm.
because that one kick will be perfect. And the story of the pottery class. I'm not sure if I've mentioned this here before. There was a teacher at a pottery class. Let's say there's 40 kids in the class, and he says to 20 of them, one half of the class, you guys are going to make as many pots as you can, clay pots, before the end of the semester. You're just going to produce as many as you can. For this other group of 20, you're going to make a single pot for the entire semester, and it's going to be the best pot you can put forth. And ironically, at the end of the semester, the class got together and voted, and the teacher weighed in on the best 10 pots in the class out of 40, the top 25%. All 10 of the pots came from the group that had made as many pots as they could over the semester. The group that wanted to make a single pot perfectly, not one of them was in the top 10. In fact, the first one was like number 17 in the whole class. And
Mm.
so it's this idea of, we think perfection is doing this one thing, and you make it last forever, and you do it all, and you put all your time and energy in there, when really mastery is doing that thing endlessly over and over and over and over, to the point where your bad pot on your worst day is still better than the novice who has never attempted to make one before. And so I think of both of those stories when it comes to mastery in the word. Precept upon precept, line upon line, is not just keep reading the textbook and retaining new information. It is, hear a precept and then go out into your life, out into the world, and apply it. Jesus says, not just hearers of the word, doers of the word. And for me, especially within the last couple of weeks, realizing that there are even still some lessons that he's been talking to me about for the last 5 years that I have intellectually accepted, but not put in the effort to convince my heart of their truth. And so when a time of trial comes, I see how quickly it's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater, how quickly I start to doubt everything that he's done and all of his character and all of his leading, just because I still have the faintest trace of belief that he's not helping me out. That's been a big one for me, that I'm not getting to this place because he's trying to prove to me I still don't believe it. He's allowed life to recreate these circumstances so that we can deepen this teaching even more, so that I have an even deeper root of this tree growing in my heart that says, the Lord helps me out in all things. Does that make sense?
Mm. It's beautiful.
Mm,
And what you're talking about mastery, and we've hit on this before, is there are just a few simple steps when it comes to reading the word, connecting with the Lord,
hmm
and applying it to your life, applying
Yeah,
it to the circumstances that come into your life. And
right.
uh it's like you said, just doing it over and over. You won't do it perfect. All the, I mean, like you said, when you first started the walk, you forgot that pattern. You weren't seeing that pattern yet, but now you
Right.
see that pattern very much like Mary, that, do unto me according to your word. So when you're reading the Bible and something pops out at you, or you get kind of a draw to it, pause there for a minute,
Yeah.
ask
For a minute,
questions.
for a day, for a
Yeah,
year.
for a year. Yeah,
Yeah.
but just ask questions and
Hmm.
see if, some of the circumstances that you might be challenged with are, does it relate to that? Um, so
Yeah,
yeah,
it's a
like
great
you
reminder.
said, it's a lifestyle. The
Hmm.
steps themselves are not complicated. That
Right.
we really do tend to overcomplicate things.
Of course.
Um, and
We
we're
desire that complexity because
well,
we're
because
complex, multidimensional beings.
we absolutely are. But back to how the Lord walks with us
Yes.
in our complex, multidimensional beings, he could be talking to us about multiple things at once,
Hmm.
and teaching us multiple things at once. But and oh, another thing, I don't know
Yeah.
why I just thought of this, but keeping it all straight in your head. That was
Impossible.
another thing that I tripped over in the beginning,
Hmm.
is when it's only intellectual and you're not meditating and bringing it down to the heart, what, like you talked about, getting those roots deeper. When he's working with you on multiple things and you're trying to keep it all straight up here, um, first of all,
It's impossible.
recognize, well, it's impossible, but recognize you doing that, because
Hmm. Hmm.
you're just trying to hold information instead of
Yes.
do what the process we're talking about is,
Yes. Yes.
bringing it to a deeper rooted
Well,
truth.
and that is such a perfect segue into the second verse that I had prepared, which again isn't a verse as much as it's a story. And this comes from Luke, chapter 10, verses 20, 25 through 37. I don't need to read the whole thing on here, mainly because most people are familiar with the parable of the Good Samaritan. But part of the reason that we picked this one for this topic is what you just said. It's more than how I would say it for me is I can tell when I'm in my head because I endlessly ping pong. And you and I have
Mm.
talked about that. I'm kind of an external processor. And so it's been really, really fortunate to be able to talk to you on the phone and basically lay out all the things that are ping ponging in my brain. And it's, well, this one teaching says this, and this other teaching says this, but this third teaching says this, but this fourth teaching says this, and how they're all true because it's his truth. And yet, what you're talking about, when I'm in my head, I'm trying to follow the rules. I'm trying to do the playbook. Maybe that's another way to say
Mm-hmm.
it. It's like
Mm-hmm.
I'm attempting to, in fact, this is what Paul uh, really refers to and harps on in Romans several times, where he says, this is what the Israelites got wrong. They tried to perform the law unto righteousness rather than perform the law from righteousness. And I think that that's, again, as humans, that's kind of our default. That's where the word religion comes from, is I'm going to butcher this, but religio is like the Greek or Latin following of the steps to divinity. And so even the term religion is, here is the playbook for how to go be like the divine. And that's part of what's again, the free gift is you, if you will, is I have made you divine, and now you perform the law from that place of divinity. And so this parable of the Good Samaritan, I'll read the beginning because it sets the context. Just then, a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus, being the excellent teacher he is, answers him with a question. He says, well, what is written in the law? What do you read there? The man answered, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus says, you have given the right answer. Do this and you will live. But wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, who is my neighbor? And then Jesus goes into the story of the Good Samaritan. And ultimately, it's this man who's jumped, for to use common verbiage, he's jumped, he's pulled down off his horse, all his stuff is taken, he's left for dead on the side of the road. A priest walks by him, crosses over to the other side. One of his countrymen walks by and crosses over to the other side. But then a Samaritan, who is the enemy of the Jew, who is this Gentile from another land, sees the man and has pity and compassion. And so he takes it upon himself, puts him on the donkey, takes him to an inn, gives him wine, gives him food, pays the innkeeper, says, look after this guy until I get back. And if he spends any more, I'll pay you back when I get here. And he says at the end, who was the neighbor? And everyone's like, well, of course, it's that man. And he says, now go and do likewise. It's this, he's telling a story because I can't tell you what mastery looks like. I can't describe it for you. I can't put it into terms as far as here's this destination you're going to get to where mastery exists. I can tell you the way of being there. And so he's not asking him, he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart. Well, how do I do that? What does that look like? How do I love my neighbor? And again, the answer is not one thing in the playbook. It's not an if then. Well, in order to love, you must always do X. Jesus paints this picture of, you tell me from this story, who is the one who loved? And they answered, it's the one who showed him mercy. And so it's this concept of mastery. The mindset is not always having a playbook, always knowing how to handle this situation. And in fact, that is, I'm pretty sure why, I don't remember who, but in one of the epistles, he says, for you are no longer under the law, you are now in love above the law. You have surpassed it. And that's not saying that God's law is lower than. It's saying that when you stand in love, you're no longer subject to, well, the law says I should do this, because from this place in your heart, you are so one with the Father that in this instance, love looks like tough love. In this instance, love looks like a hug. In this instance, love looks like teaching. In this instance, love looks like listening. And that's what I mean. You could bounce around endlessly in your head of, well, how do I handle this here? What's the playbook say? And he's not trying to get you to know the playbook. Mastery is you have become love to the point where every action you take is now showing love unto that person the same way the Father would, not a specific step to do that, if that makes sense.
Mm, yeah.
So as we kind of wind down here, what would you say that you want to leave the people with?
Well, mastery is learning to connect with that oneness with the Lord, so that and believing it, and understanding who you are, that is already done, and then learn the behavior out of that,
Mm,
not
from
to
that
get
place.
that, but from
Yes.
that place. And that's kind of, I love the visual of, you're at the top of the mountain, you're connected to God the best you know how today,
Hmm.
and that mountain will rise under you as
Yeah,
you learn and practice this as a lifestyle more and more. Um,
totally.
and I love the "What would Jesus do" movement,
Hmm.
that you know, the
Well
wristbands and
intended.
everything, well intended, um, but that but it ended up being, kind of what would he do, figuring it out. But because you're one with him, in each situation.
Mm. Well, it's funny you say that. Before I get to mine, I know you and I were talking several weeks ago. You have a Bible study that you do with your ladies, and one of the ladies in there had said, I'm dealing with this really difficult person in my life, and I know I should turn the other cheek, but I don't
Mm,
wanna. And I know I should do this, but it's really, really hard. And how often have any of us faced those situations? It's too real. You know, in the back of your mind that Jesus' teaching is turn the other cheek, but that's the same Jesus who flipped over the tables in the temple and built a rope of cords and drove people out. And so it's this concept of it's less about what I should do, because that to me is the playbook. It's
yeah,
you should do this, and that is more detrimental oftentimes than doing the wrong thing for the right reason. And what I mean by that is, again, ultimately, if you don't know the Lord and you're doing something because that's what you should do and you know in your heart that's right, that is better than choosing to do the bad thing. And
yeah,
yet, becoming a mature son means the word that you are love has rooted so deeply in your heart that you're not, ooh, I should do this. You recognize at that deeper place, this is who I am. And it's actually a false, made up nature that thinks, well, no, I should, because I'm a human, be mad at them. I should unforgive them. I should do
yeah,
this. It's the opposite of the way you were actually designed to be, but it only seems hard because we feel we're being served by that side of things. We feel
yeah,
we're being served by doing it that way. And so that's why we want to keep that. But that's again, sort of a transition into what I would say that I think um, how I would boil down this whole teaching is mastery it's a lifestyle and a mindset. It's not a location. It's not a destination. It's not even a specific outcome. It is, when we talk about the visual of the mountain, the deeper you get with the Lord, the more robust the teaching becomes. And so if you can picture a mountain being this, type of structure, when you're at the very tip, it might take, and I'm just using no, whole numbers here, it might take 10 pounds of rocks to be this capstone of the mountain. But instead of just being linear, it's not 20 pounds of rocks for the next one. It's now 30 pounds. And then the next layer is 100 pounds. And so as the mountain gets deeper, it's now 10,000 pounds of structure that needs to be added to the very base of this mountain for it to move up on the earth another foot. And I think about that because, again, if you are dead set on arriving to a place where it becomes easy, where the next lesson is as simple as, here you go, I can write it on a little fortune cookie, then you're probably progressing intellectually more than in your heart, in the spirit, because the progression in the spirit looks like I'm now contemplating a million different teachings that all seem contradictory, but I'm able to sit in the middle of it in peace, knowing who I am. And that's a totally different approach than I have a checklist that's 1,000 items long that I have to run through before I take an action. You know what I mean?
yeah. That's a great
Mhm.
explanation.
Yeah. Well, thanks for tuning in to another episode, friends. Good luck on the journey to mastery, as we'll all be on it for the rest of these days here. So enjoy the journey. No point of embarking on it if you're going to be miserable the whole time, you know?
Agreed. Agreed.
Mm. All right. We'll talk to you next time.